So this video is based on a report breaking down the complete official TMUA paper archive. There's 320 questions, 16 papers from 2016 to 2023. So each dot represents one question and is coloured by its difficulty rating. So we can see that the harder difficulty 4 and 5 questions in red and yellow are broadly increasing over the years. So I assessed each question and its answer individually and assigned a subjective difficulty score. Overall, over the years, there were 33 D2s, 113 D3s, and 124 D4s, and about 50 difficulty 5s. Every question is tagged from the specification. So from strand to topic to subtopic and the individual skills within these subtopics. So I applied this 4-tier categorization consistently across all questions, assigning both primary and secondary tags. Across the exam gave 3 strands, 25 topics, 76 subtopics, and around 103 skills that actually appeared on past exams. This was 103 of around 120 skills that I deemed from the TMUA specification that appeared in these 8 years. One question can belong to more than one topic, so we count it under each. So there are more than 40 topics each year over both papers for the 40 questions. I assign difficulty based on the decision load. How much non-routine thinking must a student do, not necessarily just how long the working may be, although that can be a factor too. So difficulty 2 I deemed as 1 or 2 routine steps. A difficulty 3 would be a standard chain with maybe 1 decision and limited insight. For a D4, it would be a disguised insight or 2 techniques that are chained together that required a little bit more reasoning or was somewhat more difficult to complete. And a difficulty 5 will generally require extended reasoning, often that a student must originate the setup to construct and solve this problem, not just a routine method. And none of them sit at D1, so this would just be an elementary routine operation. Some examples then. So for a D2, for example, would just be to differentiate a simple function and evaluate it. So these questions can often come up earlier in a paper, but less often they're coming up in more recent papers. So a difficulty 3 commonly will link standard step. So in this example, we've got integration, properties of logarithms, and expanding and comparing coefficients. So each step is relatively standard and routine, and it requires limited insight and reasoning. So a D4 typically needs a genuine idea, or there's a more protracted method that's required that's more advanced. So here, this exactly 2 routes can happen in more than one way. So you've got to find every case and count. So a D5 makes you build the whole approach, working from first principles, or applying extended reasoning consisting of non-routine decisions. Sometimes it may be spanning 3 topics with more advanced methods where there's more room for error. One is pure maths. Algebra leads, then graphs, sequences, integration, and then differentiate. But frequency isn't difficulty. So trig and graphs are some of the hardest of the big topics. So in my report, I go into a lot more detail on this and break it all down for people that are interested. So we can also look at the topic by year. So year by year, no single topic dominates every paper. The mix shifts. But algebra, calculus, and graphs are staples that recur every year. So, where do the hard questions live? Ranked by their share of D4 and D5 questions, it's generally the reasoning topics, which is generally paper 2, number and trigonometry that can span both papers. These tend to reliably produce the toughest marks. Not always, but commonly. Paper 2 keeps the maths, but changes the format, where roughly 6 questions per year will differ broadly from how standard paper 1 questions are formatted. So this will commonly involve multi-statement questions, necessary and sufficient conditions, spotting an error in a proof, ordering a proof in a certain way, negating a statement, finding a counterexample, and other formats. So if we stack each year by difficulty, we can see that the trend is clear. The mean question has climbed from a difficulty of around D3.3 on average in 2016 to around difficulty 4 on average in the last paper that's available online in 2023. There are more D4s and D5s, and generally fewer gentle openers. The ramp up to harder questions is steeper and faster. Split it into two eras and it's stark. From 2016 to 2020, the mean was around 3.45, and from 2021-2023, it's around 3.85. And the hard questions became the majority. And the exams are believed to become more difficult since then. So it's really important to calibrate your preparation to the more recent papers and not use the older ones as a guide for how difficult the TMUA paper today may be. So from this graph, every skill sits on two axes: how often it appears on the horizontal axis and how hard it tends to be on average on the vertical axis. From this, we can see the full picture on how frequently skills come up and how difficult on average they tend to be when they are part required to solve a question. Because as we said, some questions can have multiple topics. Now, the bottom right shows the easier, more frequent skills, which should be banked early and made second nature. So these questions that require these skills can be completed quickly and accurately. This includes index laws, 30 times at an easy around D.3, definite integrals around 23 times. Secure these early, these marks you should never be dropping. The top is where the harder marks are often won. Counting, modulus, deduction puzzles. Error, but on average around 4.3 difficult. So make sure to spend the time to train these thoroughly and early. So skills are commonly tested together. The most common pairings: exact trig values and when involved with solving trigonometric equations, counterexamples with necessary and sufficient conditions, and counterexamples with logic quantifier. That reasoning trio, counterexample, necessary and sufficient, and quantify logic, is paper 2's broad engine, and it often runs at difficulty 4 and above. It's really important to practice the combinations and not just the single skills, and that goes for all the other combinations as well. So again, in my report, there's a very thorough analysis of this. So we can see then, looking at the positions in the paper by difficulty, both papers tend to open gently and ramp towards the end, where there's often a cluster of difficulty 5 questions at the end, towards the end. So there's no free warm-up to waste. You have an average 3.5 minutes per question. The first 5 or so should take under 2 minutes. Answering tough questions matters, but answering the simpler ones quickly and accurately matters just as much. So don't neglect the foundation. So the foundation strand from the specification is the assumed GCSE material. It's barely 1 question in 10, but when it comes up, it's often examined at full TMUA difficulty. This includes systematic listing, angle fact, bands and elevations of 3D shapes, Pythagoras, average. Each appears just a handful of times in 8 years, but several of them run at D4 or even D5. So because they're rarer and unpredictable, you can't drill them from past frequency alone. There's other topics from the foundations that's not come up in a paper which could quite easily come up and be part of a difficult question. So it's really key that you revise the entire specification and not just look at what's come up before or what commonly comes up. 2. So here's a good example. A 2016 paper 2 question. Each interior angle of a regular n-sided polygon is 3/4 of each interior angle of a regular m-sided polygon. How many pairs of n and m were? So if you weren't too familiar with your angle facts, this is combining 3 different skills. You need to be comfortable with angles and shapes. You need to then be able to translate this and set up the construct. It will then turn into a counting question and also solving a quadratic. So this then bridges 3 topics and puts things together in a more complex fashion where the student has to be able to construct this and be very comfortable with these skills. If you didn't keep up with your angle and polygon skills, this question could be very difficult. So the full report then is on my website. It's got many tools that you can use. It's interactive, fully comprehensive, and lets you drill down every skill in combination, by paper, by year, and by difficulty. So here's an example, the counterexample skill. What it is, how often it appears, and how hard it runs. And this is on the report for every possible skill out of the approximately 120. So you can filter this to your weakest topic, read what each skill is and how it differs from its lookalikes, see its frequency and difficulty, then drill down, teach yourself the skills in combination, and open up the worked example. So here's what the data says then for revision. Take your topics by the sensor, rank the routine skills, make them second nature, train the 3 skill stretches in combination, and revise the whole specification. Make sure that you're 100% comfortable with the entire part of the GCSE specification.